Please be advised, this story contains themes of psychological distress, existential dread, and the potential collapse of societal structures. Listener discretion is advised. It began, as most nightmares do, with a whisper, a cold, insidious current that snaked through the edges of my sleep, dissolving the mundane and replacing it with something far more terrifying. Not monsters under the bed or shadows in the closet, but something infinitely more pervasive, more real. It was the silence. Imagine, if you can, the world simply stopping. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with an absolute, deafening absence of sound. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, no faint digital pulse from a forgotten device. Just the profound, suffocating quiet of a world that had ceased to function. This was my nightmare. My recurring, hyper-realistic, utterly inescapable nightmare. Every detail was etched into my subconscious with the precision of a laser. The date, October 26. The time, 3:33 a.m. The flickering, then dying screen of an old laptop, its final image a fractured circuit board, glowing a sickly green before winking out forever. And then that terrible, terrible silence. The great silence, as I'd come to call it in the darkest corners of my mind. I'm David Miller. Or I was David Miller, a perfectly ordinary man, a historian specializing in obscure digital archives. My life was about sifting through the forgotten detritus of the internet, unearthing the digital whispers of civilizations past. I dealt in facts, in verifiable data, in the concrete evidence of human endeavor. Ghosts and premonitions were not in my professional purview, nor my personal one. I was a man of logic, of reason, until the dreams started. First, I dismissed them. Stress, I told myself. Too much coffee, too many late nights staring at glowing screens. The modern world is fragile, I reasoned. Our dependence on technology is a palpable vulnerability. It's natural for the subconscious to conjure such anxieties. We all feel it, don't we? That low thrum of fear, wondering what would happen if the grid went down, if the internet simply vanished. My dreams were just a more vivid manifestation of that collective unease. But then the details began to bleed into my waking life. I'd be walking down the street, and a flicker of a streetlight would send a jolt through me, mirroring the dying laptop screen. I'd glance at a clock, and it would be 3:32 a.m., the dread building in my gut before it clicked over to 3:33 a.m., exactly as it did in the dream. I started seeing the fractured circuit board symbol everywhere. In abstract art, in random patterns on cracked pavement, even in the condensation trails of planes against a twilight sky. My rational mind, my unwavering belief in logic, was beginning to fray at the edges. I tried to talk about it cautiously at first. My friend Emily Carter, a brilliant but relentlessly pragmatic astrophysicist, listened patiently over lukewarm coffee. I described the dreams, the date, the time, the silence. She nodded, offered a sympathetic smile, and suggested I might need a vacation, or perhaps a sleep study. "David," she said, her voice laced with gentle concern, "you're under a lot of pressure with this new archiving project. Your brain is just processing your anxieties in a rather dramatic fashion." I wanted to believe her. Desperately. I wanted to go back to being the rational David, the one who scoffed at superstitions and dismissed premonitions as psychological quirks. But the dreams persisted, gaining in intensity, in terrifying clarity. They weren't just dreams anymore. They felt like memories of something that hadn't happened yet. My archiving project was a particularly unusual one. The university had acquired a vast, uncatalogued collection of early 21st century digital detritus, forgotten hard drives, ancient USB sticks, even some salvaged data from defunct social media platforms and obscure internet forums that had long since vanished from the mainstream web. It was a digital archaeological dig, a deep dive into the nascent stages of our hyper-connected world. Most of it was junk, old memes, poorly written fan fiction, endless debates about trivial pop culture. But every now and then, I'd unearth a gem, a forgotten voice, a unique perspective on a bygone era. It was in one of these forgotten corners, a dusty archive of a defunct forum called the Echo Chamber, a place where fringe theories and conspiracy discussions flourished in the early 2000s, that my world truly began to unravel. I was sifting through threads about Y2K paranoia, alien sightings, and government cover-ups, when a username caught my eye: Chronofracture. The name itself sent a shiver down my spine, echoing the fractured circuit board of my nightmares. I clicked on the user's profile, and a list of their posts appeared, dating back to 2003. Most of them were typical forum ramblings, but then I stumbled upon a thread titled, "The Whispers of the Final Timeline." My heart hammered against my ribs. The final timeline. It was a phrase I'd never encountered before, yet it felt instantly, chillingly familiar. I clicked on the thread. The first post from October 1st, 2003 read, "Does anyone else feel it? This pull, this certainty. I'm seeing things. Not just visions, but memories of a future that hasn't happened yet. A future that feels locked, predetermined. I see a date, October 26th. A time, 3:33 a.m. And then the silence. The great silence. The world just stops. All the lights go out. And it feels like it's because of something we tried to do to stop it." I leaned back from my screen, my breath catching in my throat. My hands were trembling. The date, the time, the silence. It was all there. A user nearly 2 decades ago describing my nightmare. Word for word. I scrolled down, my eyes darting over the subsequent posts by Chronofracture. October 5th, 2003. They call it the paradox of observation. The act of knowing, the attempt to change, becomes the very mechanism of its fulfillment. I'm seeing a symbol now. A fractured circuit board. It's everywhere. A warning? Or a signature? The fractured circuit board. The symbol that haunted my waking hours, that I saw in every random pattern. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't stress. This was something far, far more sinister. I felt a cold dread spread through me, chilling me to the bone. Who was Chronofracture? How could they have known? How could they have seen the same exact future, with the same exact details, almost 20 years before I did? Was I losing my mind? Or had I stumbled upon something that defied every law of physics, every understanding of time and causality? I scrolled further, desperate for answers, my fingers flying across the trackpad. The posts became more frantic, more cryptic. Chronofracture spoke of fractured realities and echoes across the chronos. They mentioned specific technical terms, obscure theories about quantum entanglement and temporal mechanics that I, a historian, barely understood. But one post, the last one before the account went silent, stopped me dead. It was dated October 25th, 2003. One day before the predicted event. The loop is closing. I know now. My attempts, my warnings, my very existence within this knowledge. It's all part of the design. The final timeline is inevitable. And the paradox? It's not just in knowing. It's in trying to prevent it. Because you are the key, David. You always were. My name, David, my actual full name, typed out on an internet forum by an anonymous user, almost 2 decades before I discovered it. The screen flickered, just once, a tiny, almost imperceptible glitch, and then the image of a fractured circuit board appeared, superimposed over the text, glowing that sickly green before vanishing. The silence in my office, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart, suddenly felt profound, felt personal. The whispers in my dreams had just found a voice, and it knew my name. The silence in my office, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart, suddenly felt profound, felt personal. The whispers in my dreams had just found a voice, and it knew my name. My hands flew to the keyboard, fingers shaking as I mashed keys, trying to bring back whatever digital phantom had just invaded my screen. I hit undo, refresh, every command I could think of. Nothing. The document was back to its pristine, unedited state. The cursor blinked innocently where I'd been typing just moments before. It was as if the glowing, sickly green text had never existed. A digital hallucination conjured by an overactive imagination and too many late nights. I leaned back, my chair groaning in protest, and stared blankly at the monitor. My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of historical analysis and critical thought, was reeling. Was I losing it? Stress certainly had been a constant companion lately. The pressure to finish my book on an obscure period of early American history had been immense. Sleepless nights, endless research, the constant hum of my own thoughts. It was a recipe for mental fatigue. But a hallucination? One so vivid, so specific, knowing my name? That felt like a leap too far. I closed my eyes, trying to replay the moment. The sudden flicker, the impossible appearance of text outside the document, the way it pulsed with that unnatural green, and then the abrupt disappearance. It wasn't a glitch. It felt deliberate, felt sentient. The final timeline awaits, Michael. The words echoed in my head, chilling me to the bone. Final timeline. As a historian, the concept of a timeline was sacrosanct. It was the bedrock of my profession, the immutable sequence of events that formed our understanding of the past. To suggest a final timeline implied others, perhaps many others, and that one was coming to an end. It was an idea that bordered on the esoteric, the fantastical. And yet, the certainty in the message, the way it had addressed me directly, made it feel undeniably real. I spent the next hour meticulously examining my computer. I checked system logs, ran deep virus scans, scoured browser history, even looked for hidden files. I was a digital archaeologist, digging through layers of code, desperately searching for any trace, any digital footprint of what had just happened. But there was nothing. My machine was clean, operating perfectly, a silent testament to its own innocence. The absence of evidence was more terrifying than finding a rootkit. It meant whatever this was, it wasn't conventional. It wasn't something I could explain away with a software bug or a sophisticated hack. A cold dread began to settle in my stomach. This wasn't just a random anomaly. It was directed. It knew me, and it was talking about timelines. My historian's brain, despite its initial resistance, couldn't help but make the connection to the vague, unsettling sensations I'd been experiencing for weeks. The whispers in my dreams weren't just dreams anymore. They were fragments, premonitions, a growing sense of disquiet that had slowly permeated my waking life. I dismissed them as stress, little things, a fleeting feeling of déjà vu that was too strong to be normal, a moment where a familiar street seemed subtly different, only to snap back into place the next second. The unnerving sensation of being watched when I was alone in my office, a prickling on the back of my neck that I'd attributed to an open window or a draft. I told myself it was just the strain of my work, the isolation, the sheer volume of information I was constantly processing. My mind, I reasoned, was simply playing tricks on me. But now the text message had given a name to that nebulous fear. It had brought it into sharp, terrifying focus. I tried to work, to immerse myself back into my research on colonial-era trade routes, but the words "final timeline" kept flashing behind my eyes. Every paragraph I read, every date I encountered seemed to mock me. What good was understanding the past if the very fabric of time was mutable, or worse, coming to an end? Frustrated, I pushed my chair back again and stood up. I paced my small office, the worn carpet a testament to countless hours spent in thought. My gaze drifted to the window, overlooking the quiet suburban street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, painting the familiar scene in an unfamiliar light. Was it my imagination? Or did the colors seem a little too vibrant, the edges a little too sharp? My paranoia was starting to warp my perception. I needed to clear my head, to find some anchor in reality. I picked up my phone, almost instinctively scrolling through contacts, looking for a familiar name, someone I could call, someone who could offer a grounded perspective. My friend David, a cynical but brilliant computer science professor, came to mind. He'd probably laugh, tell me I needed a vacation, or suggest I'd finally succumb to the obscure historical figures I spent my life with. But at least he'd offer a logical explanation, however dismissive. Before I could dial, I hesitated. How would I even begin to explain this? "Hey David," a glowing green message appeared on my screen, knew my name, and told me about a final timeline. Oh, and I think I might be going crazy. He'd definitely think I was crazy. No, I needed to process this first, to find something, anything that could corroborate my experience before I sounded the alarm. My historian's instinct kicked in. When faced with an inexplicable event, you search for patterns, for anomalies, for anything that deviates from the known record. If the final timeline was approaching, or if timelines were shifting, surely there would be other signs. Not just for me, but in the broader world. I sat back down, a new resolve hardening my gaze. I wouldn't search for digital ghosts anymore. I'd search for historical glitches. If time itself was being manipulated, there would be inconsistencies, errors in the record, things that shouldn't be there, or things that should be there but weren't. I opened my university's vast digital archives, a place I considered my second home. I started with my current area of expertise, the late 17th and early 18th centuries in America. I began running cross-referencing queries, looking for any unusual keywords, any sudden shifts in documented events, any discrepancies that were too significant to be chalked up to human error or incomplete records. My focus intensified. I wasn't looking for minor historical debates. I was looking for paradoxes. Hours blurred into a relentless pursuit. I scanned census data, colonial newspapers, personal letters, shipping manifests. My eyes ached, but I pushed on, fueled by a terrifying curiosity. The vast ocean of historical data flowed past, seemingly normal, utterly consistent. My initial hope began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of futility. Maybe David was right. Maybe I was just exhausted, projecting my anxieties onto a flickering screen. Just as I was about to give up, to concede defeat to my own sanity, a peculiar entry caught my attention. It was buried deep within a digitized collection of shipping logs from Boston Harbor, dated 1703. A vessel, the Sea Serpent, was listed as arriving with a cargo of exotic spices from the East Indies. Nothing inherently strange about that. But then I saw the next entry. The very same ship, the Sea Serpent, listed as departing for West Africa just 3 weeks later, carrying a cargo of textiles and tools. My brow furrowed. East Indies to West Africa in 3 weeks? In 1703? That was geographically impossible. The journey from the East Indies to Boston alone would have taken months, navigating around the Cape of Good Hope. And then to turn around and embark on a transatlantic voyage to Africa in less than a month? It defied the physics of sailing in that era. It defied logic. I double-checked the dates, the ship names, the cargo manifests. Every detail was meticulously recorded, authenticated by the Colonial Port Authority's seal. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't a mistaken identity. The Sea Serpent had apparently performed a feat of nautical impossibility. 2 distinct, geographically distant voyages, compressed into a time frame that simply did not exist. My heart began to pound again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a jolt of exhilaration, a terrifying validation. This wasn't a hallucination. This was an anomaly, a glitch in the historical record, staring back at me from 3 centuries ago. And it wasn't just any glitch. It was a temporal one. I zoomed in on the scanned document, my fingers tracing the faded ink on the screen. And that's when I saw it, tucked almost imperceptibly into the flourishes of the Old English script. A tiny, almost invisible symbol. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge of color. A sickly green. A sickly green. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a smudge. As I zoomed in, pushing the digital magnification to its absolute limit, I could make out a faint, almost crystalline structure to the color. It was woven into the paper fibers, not sitting on top, as if it had been there for centuries, a part of the very document itself. It was a tiny, intricate symbol, no bigger than a pinhead, almost like a distorted, stylized leaf, or perhaps an eye, but one that seemed to weep or bleed that unsettling hue. My mind raced, sifting through countless hours of research, obscure texts, forgotten languages, and esoteric iconography. I'd seen a lot of strange things in my line of work, but this felt different. It was an anomaly, a deliberate mark hidden in plain sight, on a document that was already a historical enigma. The air in my study suddenly felt heavy, charged with an unseen current. My fingers hovered over the screen, a strange mix of exhilaration and dread washing over me. Why was this symbol here? What did it mean? And why had no one ever noticed it before? I cross-referenced the image with every known symbol database, every alchemical script, every ancient cipher I could access. Nothing. It was unique, or at least uniquely disguised. The obscurity was almost intentional, as if designed to evade detection by anyone who wasn't looking for precisely that. My gaze drifted to the worn leather-bound journal sitting on the edge of my desk, the very journal that had first introduced me to the chilling concept of the final timeline. The journal whose author, a man named Elias Thorne, had vanished without a trace after meticulously documenting his descent into a terrifying rabbit hole of temporal paradoxes. Could there be a connection? Thorne's writings were dense, often cryptic, filled with personal anxieties alongside his groundbreaking, though unsettling theories. I hadn't found anything overtly green in its pages before, but then again I hadn't been looking for a microscopic, almost invisible detail. I pulled the journal closer, its age scent filling my nostrils. A mix of old paper, leather, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood or forgotten copper. I began to flip through its pages, not in chronological order, but searching, scanning, my eyes now trained for that particular shade of sickly green. Every diagram, every marginal note, every faded sketch was scrutinized. The hours blurred into a continuous stream of frantic searching, the only sound the rustle of pages and the soft hum of my computer. Then on a page near the middle, A page filled with Thorne's frantic scrawl detailing a particularly disturbing dream sequence. I found it. Not a direct match, not the exact symbol, but a crude, faded sketch in the margin. It was a simplified version, almost a preliminary thought, of the same distorted leaf-like shape, rendered in what appeared to be a very faint, almost invisible greenish ink. It was so faint I must have overlooked it a dozen times. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a deliberate breadcrumb, left by Thorne himself. Beneath the sketch, written in Thorne's almost illegible hand, were a few words barely legible. The serpent's eye, marker of the shifting sands. The green tide recedes, the final paradox emerges. The serpent's eye. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. It evoked ancient myths, forbidden knowledge, something primal and dangerous. Marker of the shifting sands. This felt directly connected to Thorne's theories about the final timeline, not being fixed, but constantly in flux, a shifting, uncertain path. And the green tide recedes, the final paradox emerges. What did that even mean? Was the green a warning? Or a sign of something ending, making way for the ultimate contradiction? I stared at the journal entry, then back at the digital image of the ancient document. The symbol was identical in its core design, despite the difference in clarity and medium. Thorne hadn't just discovered the symbol, he had known about it. He had recognized its significance and even given it a name. But how? How could a man living in the late 19th century have known about a symbol hidden on a document from the 15th century? A symbol so cleverly concealed that it had evaded detection for hundreds of years. Unless he hadn't just found it. Unless he had been guided to it. Or perhaps the symbol itself was far older than the 15th century document. An archaic mark passed down through generations, subtly incorporated into texts by those who understood its true meaning. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. Thorne's journal wasn't just a record of his research. It was a testament to his unraveling. A slow descent into paranoia and obsession. He wrote about feeling watched, about whispers in the dark, about the fabric of reality fraying at the edges. I had dismissed much of it as the ramblings of an isolated genius driven mad by his own theories. Now, with this green symbol, the ancient document, and Thorne's cryptic notes, his paranoia began to feel chillingly rational. I returned to the 15th century document on my screen, specifically to the section where the symbol was hidden. It was embedded within a passage that spoke, in archaic Latin, of the unraveling of the great tapestry of time, and the inevitable convergence of all paths into a singular, unyielding thread. The language itself was dense, almost poetic, but now, with the context of Thorne's journal, it took on a sinister new meaning. The singular, unyielding thread. Was that the final timeline? And was the green symbol a warning, a seal, or perhaps even a key to understanding this convergence? My mind raced through the implications. If Thorne was right, if the final timeline was real, and if this green symbol was a marker, then what exactly was it marking? A point of no return? A choice? A preordained destiny? The paradox Thorne alluded to, the one that emerges as the green tide recedes, started to solidify in my mind. How could a timeline be final if it could be seen, documented, or even influenced? The very act of observing it, of knowing its existence, surely altered its nature, didn't it? That was the core contradiction, the impossible truth that had consumed Thorne. I felt a sudden, intense chill, despite the warmth of the room. It wasn't just the intellectual puzzle anymore. It was something far more visceral. It was the feeling of being on the precipice of something vast and ancient, something that humanity was never meant to fully comprehend. Thorne had warned in his journal about the dangers of seeking this knowledge, about the echoes that follow those who peer too deeply into the temporal abyss. I had always thought of those as metaphorical echoes. Now I wasn't so sure. I looked around my study, suddenly feeling exposed. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, the silence heavier. Had Thorne felt this way? That his discoveries weren't just intellectual exercises, but invitations to something far more dangerous? His final entries spoke of them, shadowy figures who sought to control the final timeline, to ensure its unyielding nature. He described them as keepers of the green mark, individuals who guarded the secrets of temporal manipulation, intervening to correct any deviation from the predetermined path. The serpent's eye, he had called the symbol, the mark of their vigilance. The idea that there was an organization, a secret society perhaps, dedicated to maintaining a specific final timeline, was terrifying. It implied a level of control over human destiny that was almost unthinkable. And if they were the keepers of the green mark, then finding this mark on an ancient document, and then connecting it to Thorn, meant I was now on their radar. Or, at the very least, on the same dangerous path that had led Thorn to his disappearance. My gaze fell back to the computer screen, to the microscopic green symbol on the 15th century document. It pulsed in my vision, almost imperceptibly, like a tiny malevolent eye staring back at me from across the centuries. It wasn't just a clue anymore, it was a warning. A warning that I had just crossed an invisible line, stepping into a domain I was utterly unprepared for. The green tide hadn't just receded for Thorn, it had swallowed him whole. And now I had found its mark. I needed to understand what the green tide recedes truly meant. Was it a state of the timeline, a period of instability? And what happened when it receded? What final paradox emerged? I knew I couldn't stop now. The unsettling truth was too close, too tangible. But the growing sense of dread, the feeling of being watched, was becoming almost unbearable. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to protect the journal, to hide it, to keep it from prying eyes. But whose eyes? And what would they do if they found it, if they found me? The thought alone made my blood run cold. I had to find out more about these keepers of the green mark. Their vigilance, as Thorn called it, seemed to stretch across centuries, subtly guiding or eliminating those who came too close to their secrets. My next step was clear, though fraught with danger. I needed to delve deeper into Thorn's journal, to find every mention of the green symbol, every cryptic reference to them, and every clue he might have left about their methods, their goals, and their terrifying power over the final timeline. It was a desperate race against an unknown enemy, a race that Thorn had seemingly lost. And I had just picked up his trail, marked by that unsettling sickly green. The sickly green wasn't a glow stick or some harmless novelty. It was a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence clinging to the edges of the shattered window frame, tracing a ghostly path across the dust-caked floorboards of Thorn's abandoned apartment. It pulsed with a barely audible hum, a sound I could only detect when pressing my ear close to the scarred wood. This wasn't just a trace, it was a signature, a residue of something profoundly unnatural. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. Thorn had been here, and whatever he'd been dealing with, whatever had taken him, had left its mark. I pulled out the small, specialized scanner Thorn himself had given me months ago, a device I'd always dismissed as one of his eccentricities. Its display flickered to life, showing a faint, wavering energy reading, an anomaly it labeled chronon residue. Chronons. Thorn had once rambled about them, theoretical particles that carried temporal information. I thought he was joking. The green trail led me out of the apartment, down the creaking stairs, and into the grimy alleyway behind the building. It wasn't a continuous line, but rather a series of faint intermittent glows, like breadcrumbs left by a desperate man. Each flicker of green was a whisper from the void, an invitation to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. The air grew colder, even though it was a mild autumn night, and a prickle of unease crawled up my spine. The trail ended at a derelict industrial complex, a maze of crumbling brick and rusted metal on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place where forgotten dreams went to die, and perhaps, where unspeakable secrets were born. The green pulsed brightest at a reinforced steel door, half hidden behind overgrown vines. It was unmarked, uninviting, sealed by a heavy-duty padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But the green was there, a faint halo around the lock, a silent confirmation. This had to be it. Thorn's secret lab, his last refuge, or perhaps his final trap. Breaking in was surprisingly easy, a testament to how long the place had been abandoned, or how overconfident Thorn had become. The padlock yielded to a bolt cutter without much protest, and the hinges shrieked in protest as I forced the door open. A wave of stale, metallic air, thick with the scent of ozone and something vaguely acrid, washed over me. Inside, the darkness was absolute, a suffocating blanket that pressed in from all sides. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom, revealing a cavernous space filled with shrouded machinery, forgotten workbenches, and countless stacks of scientific journals. This wasn't just a lab, it was a sanctuary, a fortress of knowledge. And in the center of it all, beneath a suspended scaffolding, stood a massive cylindrical device, humming with a low, rhythmic thrum. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. a complex array of shimmering coils, crystal conduits, and what looked like a miniature black hole contained within a glass sphere. And around it, emanating from its core, was that same sickly green light, now stronger, more vibrant, almost hypnotic. This was Thorne's Chronos observation array, the device he'd hinted at, the one that could supposedly peel back the layers of reality. He'd said it could show him glimpses of the future, not just probabilities, but the future, the final timeline. My gaze swept across the room, searching for clues, for answers. On a cluttered workbench amidst a scattering of circuit boards and soldering tools, I found a leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with Thorne's frantic, almost illegible handwriting, interspersed with complex equations and crude sketches. I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the entries, each word a step deeper into the rabbit hole. Entry 147, it read, dated just a week before his disappearance. The Chronos array is stable. The projections are clear, terrifyingly so. The final timeline is not an emergent property of causality. It's imposed. There's an entity and organization controlling it, guiding it. They call themselves the architects of fate, or so their residual chronon signatures suggest. My blood ran cold. Architects of fate. It wasn't just a theory, it was a conspiracy, a terrifying reality. I continued reading, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. Thorne's journal detailed his observations. They intervened subtly at first, then with increasing force, to ensure specific events unfold. Major historical turning points, technological advancements, even the rise and fall of nations, all orchestrated. Their goal? A perfectly optimized, predictable future, devoid of true randomness, true free will. He wrote about seeing glimpses of my own life, my own decisions already laid out, predetermined. It was a chilling thought, the idea that my choices were merely echoes of a future already written. Thorne had discovered that the final timeline wasn't just one possible future among many, but the only future they allowed to exist. Any deviation, any temporal anomaly, was swiftly and brutally corrected. And Thorne, with his Chronos array, was creating a massive anomaly just by observing it. He was seen behind the curtain. They're hunting me. Another entry screamed from the page. They know I've seen too much. My array, it's not just observing, it's interfering. The act of observation itself is creating ripples, tiny divergences from their perfect timeline. They call it a temporal bleed, and they cannot tolerate it. He'd almost sounded proud of it, despite the danger. He'd found a way to fight back, a way to poke holes in their carefully constructed reality. But what was it? How could observation cause interference? I flipped further, finding a crude diagram. It showed the Chronos array, but with an additional component sketched in, labeled resonance emitter. Thorne had theorized that if the Chronos array could observe the final timeline, a sufficiently powerful, tuned emitter could potentially resonate with those temporal energies, creating a feedback loop, a localized disruption, a way to create a new path, a true alternate future, even if just for a moment. This wasn't just about watching the future, it was about changing it. And that was an act of war against the architects of fate. Suddenly, a faint, high-pitched whine cut through the silence of the lab, a sound that wasn't coming from Thorne's Chronos array. It was growing louder, approaching. My scanner, which had been idly displaying the chronon residue, now pulsed violently, its readings skyrocketing. Temporal signature detected. It blared silently on its screen. Rapid approach. Source, unknown. They were here. The architects. They had found Thorne's lab, and by extension, they had found me. I dropped the journal, my heart leaping into my throat. The hum of the approaching entity vibrated through the floor, a deep, unsettling resonance that made my teeth ache. I scanned the room frantically, looking for an escape, a weapon, anything. The only light was the eerie green glow of Thorne's array, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent intent. Then, a flicker of movement at the far end of the lab, near a section of wall that seemed strangely newer, less weathered than the rest. A shimmering distortion in the air, like heat haze on a summer road, but cold, intensely cold. It was expanding, coalescing, revealing a form within. Two figures emerged from the distortion, gliding rather than walking. They were cloaked, their features obscured by deep hoods, but I could make out their unervingly smooth movements, their utter silence. They carried no visible weapons, but their presence alone was a weapon, radiating an aura of cold, calculating power. and around them a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of that same sickly green energy pulsed, stronger than anything I'd seen before. They weren't just observing the timeline, they were made of it. One of them raised a hand, and a wave of pure, concentrated chronon energy slammed into the Chronos array. Sparks erupted, glass conduits fractured, and the central black hole-like sphere flickered violently, its green light dying down to a sputtering ember. They were destroying Thorn's work, erasing his defiance. I had to move. Now, if they destroyed the array, any chance of understanding Thorn's research, any hope of unraveling the architect's control would be lost. And if they found me, I would become another erased anomaly. My eyes darted to a hidden crawl space Thorn had once jokingly shown me, a relic from the building's original purpose, tucked behind a stack of rusted barrels. It was my only chance. But to get there, I had to cross the open floor directly in their line of sight. As the second figure began to move towards a workbench, presumably to retrieve Thorn's journal, I made my decision. I lunged not for the crawl space but for the journal. If I couldn't save the array, I could at least save his knowledge. My fingers closed around the worn leather just as a blast of energy from the first figure slammed into the workbench, sending splinters and metal shrapnel flying past my head. I rolled the journal clutch tight and scrambled towards the crawl space. The air crackled with energy, and I could feel the cold tendrils of their presence reaching for me, attempting to unravel my very existence. My scanner, still clutched in my other hand, screamed its warning. Temporal lock engaged. Probability of escape critical. I squeezed into the narrow opening, pulling the rusted barrels back into place just as a searing green light erupted from where I'd been standing, vaporizing the air itself. I could hear the faint, chilling hum of their movements outside, their methodical search. They weren't just looking for me. They were looking for any trace of Thorn's rebellion, any shard of the truth he had uncovered. And I, with his journal, was now the last flickering ember of that defiance. The crawl space was dark, suffocating. I pressed myself against the grimy wall, hardly daring to breathe, the journal pressed to my chest like a shield. Outside, the sounds of destruction continued, punctuated by the unsettling rhythmic hum of the architect's presence. They were dismantling everything, erasing Thorn from existence, not just his physical presence, but his legacy, his knowledge. And I was trapped, a mouse in a maze, holding the very thing they sought to obliterate. I had the journal, but what did it mean? What could I do with it? Thorn had lost. Had I just inherited his impossible war? I had inherited his impossible war. The words echoed in the hollow space Thorn left behind, a chilling prophecy now burdening my shoulders. The journal, heavy and ancient in my hands, felt less like a book and more like a ticking bomb. Its cover was a dark, almost iridescent leather, unlike anything I'd ever touched, etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light of the abandoned bunker. Thorn had dedicated his life and ultimately lost it protecting this. Now it was mine. My fingers traced the intricate patterns, a mix of arcane geometry, and what looked like distorted astrological charts. The clasp, a peculiar metallic alloy, clicked open with a soft, almost mournful sigh. Inside, the pages were a stark contrast to the cover, delicate, almost translucent, made from a material I couldn't identify. The ink varied, sometimes a deep sepia, sometimes a vibrant, almost electric blue, sometimes a faded graphite. It wasn't a linear narrative. It was a maddening mosaic of observations, equations, historical footnotes, and what appeared to be personal pleas. Thorn hadn't just written in one language. There were passages in Latin, ancient Greek, ciphers I recognized from obscure historical societies, and entirely alien scripts that defied any known linguistic origin. He was a brilliant mind, a polymath, and this journal was the chaotic testament to his genius and his paranoia. I spent the next few days in a self-imposed exile, holed up in a dusty, forgotten corner of a university library, the kind of place where even the librarians forgot to check. My academic background, my obsession with forgotten histories and dead languages, now felt less like a hobby and more like a cruel twist of fate. I meticulously photographed every page, cross-referencing symbols, running algorithms against known ciphers, and translating fragments. Sleep became a luxury, food an afterthought. The world outside the library's ancient walls seemed distant, unreal, as if I had slipped into a timeline of my own. The journal wasn't just a record. It was a warning. Thorn wrote about the Chronos Collective, a shadowy organization he believed had existed for millennia, subtly guiding and pruning the branches of reality. Their goal, as he saw it, was not merely to observe, but to enforce a single perfect existence, the final timeline. Thorne argued that the universe, by its very nature, craved multiplicity. Every choice, every unmade decision, every flickering possibility generated a new timeline, a new branch. It was the cosmic equivalent of biodiversity, a vast, beautiful, chaotic forest of infinite potential. The Chronos Collective, however, sought to clear-cut this forest, to cultivate a single, meticulously planned garden. They believed that by eliminating all deviations, all temporal anomalies, they could achieve ultimate stability, an existence free from paradoxes, suffering, or unforeseen consequences. But Thorne saw the paradox in their very ambition. If all other timelines were pruned, what would remain? A static, sterile existence, devoid of true novelty, true discovery, true free will. It would be a prison of perfection, a universe that had ceased to evolve. He called it the Great Stagnation. His journal detailed how the Chronos Collective operated. They didn't travel through time in the traditional sense. Instead, they possessed a technology, or perhaps an inherent ability, to perceive and influence the probability currents of reality. They could nudge events, subtly alter outcomes, ensuring that certain key moments unfolded in a specific, predetermined way, thereby collapsing countless potential timelines into their desired, final timeline. One passage, translated from a complex runic cipher intertwined with quantum equations, sent a shiver down my spine. Asterisk, they do not rewrite history. They erase futures. They do not alter the past. They sterilize possibility. The final timeline is not an endpoint, but an infinite loop of preordained existence. We become echoes, not individuals. Asterisk, Thorne had discovered their methodology through a series of inexplicable historical anomalies. He'd spent his life documenting events that should have unfolded one way, based on all available evidence, suddenly shifted, leaving behind faint, almost imperceptible traces of what might have been. A lost empire that briefly flourished in ancient texts before vanishing. A forgotten scientific discovery that briefly promised a technological leap centuries ahead of its time, only to be dismissed as delusion. Thorne believed these were the scars of pruned timelines, the faint echoes of erased futures. His research led him to a specific focal point. A recurring symbol, a distorted hourglass with an extra loop, appearing in disparate cultures across different epochs. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a signature. And it was etched into the final page of Thorne's journal, alongside coordinates. The coordinates weren't for a place on Earth, not in any conventional sense. They were celestial, pointing to a specific constellation, a particular star system. But below them, scrawled in Thorne's urgent, almost frantic hand, was a cryptic instruction. Asterisk, the reflection of the celestial in the terrestrial. Seek the inverted spire where time flows backwards. Asterisk, an inverted spire where time flowed backwards. What did that even mean? Was it a metaphor? A physical location? A riddle? My mind raced, sifting through architectural marvels, ancient myths, and obscure scientific concepts. As I delved deeper, the sense of isolation began to morph into something far more sinister. Paranoia. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, convinced that every shadow held an observer, every distant siren a harbinger of my capture. My phone seemed to buzz with phantom notifications. The library, once a sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage. Then came the first undeniable sign. An email sent to an old, rarely used account with no subject line and no sender. The body contained a single image, a distorted hourglass identical to the one in Thorne's journal. But this one was burning, its sand spilling out like molten gold. Beneath it, a single line of text. Asterisk, the inheritance is noted. The debt is due. Asterisk, my blood ran cold. They knew I had it. Thorne's impossible war was no longer theoretical. It was knocking at my digital door. The Chronos Collective wasn't just a conspiracy theory from a dead man's journal. They were real, and they were watching. I wiped my digital footprint, or at least tried to. I abandoned my apartment, leaving behind everything but a backpack with essentials and the journal, now carefully hidden within a false bottom. I moved through the city like a ghost, using cash, avoiding cameras, sleeping in cheap motels under assumed names. The sheer scale of what I was up against was paralyzing. How do you fight an organization that controls the very fabric of reality? How do you hide from those who can erase your future? But Thorne hadn't just left me a burden. He had left me hope. Tucked into a hidden pocket of the journal, I found a small, intricately carved wooden disc. On one side, the distorted hourglass symbol. On the other, a series of concentric circles, each with tiny, almost microscopic engravings of what looked like constellations. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a key, I was sure of it. The celestial coordinates, the inverted spire, the burning hourglass email, and now this disc. They were all pieces of a puzzle, a breadcrumb trail left by Thorn, not just to understand his war, but to continue it. He hadn't just lost. He had made a final desperate move, passing the torch to an unwitting successor. I looked at the coordinates again, then at the wooden disc. The concentric circles on the disc seemed to align, in some abstract way, with the celestial pattern Thorn had drawn. The inverted spire where time flows backwards. It was a phrase that haunted me, a riddle that demanded an answer. The answer, I realized, might not be a place on a map, but a concept, a hidden mechanism, or a forgotten technology. My fear was immense, a cold hand squeezing my heart, but beneath it, a flicker of something else began to ignite. A fierce, defiant curiosity. Thorn had died trying to protect the multiplicity of existence, the glorious, messy chaos of infinite possibilities. If the Chronos Collective succeeded, everything would be reduced to a single predetermined path. That wasn't life, it was an algorithm. I couldn't let that happen. Not if I had the power or even just the knowledge to stop it. Thorn had lost, yes, but he had planted a seed. And now, against all odds, against every instinct for self-preservation, I felt an undeniable pull to nurture it. The journal wasn't just a record of a dead man's obsession. It was a call to arms. And I, Michael, an ordinary historian, was about to answer. My first step was clear. Decipher the true meaning of the inverted spire and the celestial reflection. The game had begun, and I was unknowingly playing for the highest stakes imaginable. My mind, a historian's labyrinth of timelines and forgotten names, immediately fixated on the phrase, inverted spire and celestial reflection. It was a paradox, a contradiction that hinted at something far more profound than any architectural marvel or astronomical event I'd ever studied. The stakes, I now understood, transcended personal gain or academic recognition. They were, as the voice had promised, immeasurable. My first step was a plunge into the digital abyss, followed by a pilgrimage to the hallowed halls of academia. I started with the most obscure databases, cross-referencing keywords, inverted architecture, celestial mirrors, temporal reflection, ancient spires, paradoxical alignments. The internet, usually a vast ocean of information, offered only fragmented whispers, often dismissed as fringe theories or poetic metaphors. But I wasn't looking for mainstream acceptance. I was hunting for the outliers, the forgotten voices. The university library, a place I considered a second home, became my war room. I spent days buried in dusty tomes, poring over ancient texts on cosmology, forgotten architectural blueprints, and cryptic alchemical diagrams. My focus narrowed to a handful of obscure manuscripts from the late 17th and early 18th centuries, texts usually relegated to the esoteric studies section, rarely touched. One particular manuscript, bound in crumbling leather and titled The Etheric Axis, caught my eye. Its author was listed only as AR, and its contents were a baffling blend of astronomical observation and philosophical speculation on the nature of reality. Within its brittle pages, I found the first tangible clue. A faded hand-drawn diagram depicted a structure that was undeniably a spire, yet its apex pointed downwards into what appeared to be a shimmering ethereal pool. Beneath it, a series of complex astrological charts mapped out an extremely rare celestial alignment, not of planets, but of distant nebulae and dark matter concentrations, an alignment that occurred only once every several millennia. The manuscript spoke of this alignment as the Great Mirroring, a moment when the heavens reflect the true nature of time, and the inverted axis reveals its power. The author, AR, was clearly a brilliant but deeply unconventional mind. A quick search led me to a brief, almost dismissive entry in a historical register. Dr. Alastair Reid, a disgraced astronomer and philosopher from the early 18th century, whose radical theories on gravitational time distortion and the cosmic manipulation of reality led to his expulsion from every major scientific society. He was labeled a madman, his work burned or locked away. But what if he wasn't mad? What if he was simply centuries ahead of his time? The trail from Alastair Reid led me, surprisingly, to a contemporary name. A footnote in a forgotten academic journal from the late 1990s, referencing Alistair Reid's etheric axis, was attributed to a Dr. Evelyn Reid, a direct descendant, it seemed, and an astrophysicist who had suffered a remarkably similar fate. Dr. Evelyn Reid had published a series of controversial papers on quantum entanglement across cosmic distances and the potential for ancient structures to harness zero-point energy fields, theories that were vehemently rejected by the scientific establishment. Her career had ended abruptly, her research grants revoked, her reputation shattered. She was exactly who I needed to find. Tracking Evelyn Reid proved far more difficult than locating Alistair's ancient texts. Her professional footprint had been almost entirely erased. No current university affiliation, no public records beyond a few scathing reviews of her past work. It took weeks of digging through archived academic forums, cross-referencing obscure physics conferences, and even a few anonymous tips from retired academics who remembered her brilliance, despite her controversial theories. Finally, I found an address. A remote, unassuming cabin nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains, far from any major city. It was the kind of place someone went to disappear, or to escape the scrutiny of a world that refused to understand them. The drive was long, the winding roads eventually giving way to a muddy track. When I finally reached the cabin, it looked abandoned, overgrown with wild foliage. A rusty old pickup truck sat in the driveway, covered in pine needles. I knocked on the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing ominously in the stillness. After a long moment, the door creaked open a few inches. A woman's eyes, sharp and piercing, peered out from the darkness within. Her face was partially obscured by shadow, but I could tell she was older, her features etched with intelligence and perhaps a touch of weariness. "Dr. Evelyn Reid?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "Who's asking?" Her voice was gravelly, wary. "My name is Michael. I'm a historian. I've been researching certain historical anomalies, and your work, particularly your papers on cosmic resonance and temporal distortions, kept coming up." She paused, her gaze scrutinizing me. "My work was discredited, Mr. Michael. It led nowhere but to my professional ruin. I suggest you look elsewhere for your anomalies." She began to close the door. "Wait," I blurted out, a desperate surge of adrenaline. "I found a manuscript, The Etheric Axis, by Alistair Reid. It mentions an inverted spire and a celestial reflection. Your ancestor, I believe. He was talking about something similar to your theories, wasn't he?" The door stopped closing. The eye widened slightly. A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the chirping of unseen crickets. Then slowly the door opened fully. Evelyn Reid stood before me. Her hair was a wild mass of silver, her face lined, but her eyes, though guarded, held a flicker of intense curiosity, perhaps even recognition. She wore an old, faded flannel shirt and jeans, looking more like a reclusive woods dweller than a brilliant astrophysicist. "Come in, Michael," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with a grudging intrigue. "But don't expect answers. I've spent decades chasing ghosts." Inside, the cabin was a chaotic shrine to forgotten science. Stacks of books, star charts, and complex equations covered every surface. Old computer monitors blinked with astronomical data. The air smelled of old paper and ozone. "You mentioned Alistair," she began, gesturing to a cluttered armchair for me to sit. "He wasn't just my ancestor. He was my inspiration, and ultimately my curse. His etheric axis was a foundational text for my own research. He was trying to articulate something truly profound, something the world wasn't ready for." "The inverted spire," I prompted. "What is it?" Evelyn walked over to a whiteboard covered in intricate diagrams. "It's not a physical spire in the way you might imagine a building, Michael. Not entirely." Alistair theorized, and my own calculations later corroborated, that the inverted spire is a specific gravitational anomaly, a singularity that forms under extraordinarily rare conditions. Think of it as a localized warping of space-time, so extreme that from certain vantage points, particularly through a specific cosmic lens, it appears to invert reality itself. She tapped a complex equation. The celestial reflection is the key to activating it, or rather revealing it. It's a precise multi-factor cosmic alignment, not just of visible stars, but of gravitational waves, dark matter concentrations, and even quantum fields. When this alignment occurs, it acts like a cosmic mirror, reflecting the true nature of this anomaly, making it accessible, perhaps even manipulable. My mind reeled. Manipulable? What could be manipulated? Evelyn turned to me, her eyes intense. Time, Michael. The very fabric of causality. Alastair believed that this inverted spire, when activated by the celestial reflection, acts as a temporal anchor, a point where the flow of time can be redirected, or even locked into a specific trajectory. He called it the final timeline, a predetermined future that, once set, becomes immutable. She paced the small space. My research went further. I hypothesized that this isn't just a natural phenomenon. Ancient civilizations, perhaps even intelligences far older than humanity, may have understood this mechanism. They might have built structures, not to create the spire, but to amplify or focus the energies of the celestial reflection, to harness its power. The implications were staggering. So, someone could use this to lock humanity into a specific future? To control destiny? Exactly, Evelyn said, her voice grim. Imagine a future where every event, every choice, is already predetermined, unchangeable. That's the power the final timeline represents. It's what I was trying to warn the world about, and why they silenced me. Just as she finished speaking, a flicker. The lights in the cabin dimmed for a fraction of a second, then brightened again. A low hum like a distant generator seemed to emanate from outside, then abruptly ceased. Evelyn's eyes darted to the window, her expression shifting from intensity to a familiar paranoia. They're listening, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They always are. My research wasn't just ridiculed, Michael. It was suppressed. And the people who suppressed it, they're still out there, making sure no one gets too close to the truth. She walked quickly to a hidden panel behind a bookshelf, revealing an old, rugged server tower humming softly. I have more, much more. Hidden data, simulations, fragments of ancient texts that connect this to specific geographical locations. But we can't stay here. If they know you found me, we have very little time. She pulled out a worn leather-bound journal, its pages filled with elegant script and complex diagrams. This is Alastair's original journal, the one they thought they'd destroyed. It contains the precise coordinates for what he believed was the primary focus point of the inverted spire, a location that aligns perfectly with the great mirroring celestial event. He even theorized about a physical artifact, a temporal key, that could interact with the spire. A sudden sharp crack echoed from the woods outside, like a branch snapping underfoot. Evelyn froze, her hand instinctively reaching for an old, rusty hunting rifle leaning against the wall. Her eyes met mine, wide with a newfound urgency, a shared understanding of the invisible threat closing in. This journal, she said, thrusting it into my hands, and my calculations, they point to a site in the American Southwest. An ancient, forgotten observatory. It's our best bet for finding this temporal key, and understanding how to stop the final timeline from being set. But we have to move now. The game had indeed begun, and I, Michael, an ordinary historian, was now partnered with a disgraced astrophysicist, racing against unseen forces to decipher an ancient paradox and prevent the very fabric of reality from being irrevocably altered. The inverted spire and the celestial reflection were no longer abstract concepts. They were a looming threat, a ticking clock, and our next destination was clear: the sun-baked deserts of the American Southwest. The sun-baked deserts of the American Southwest swallowed us whole, a vast, indifferent expanse of red rock and shimmering heat. The coordinates, painstakingly pieced together from the fragmented data we'd collected, led us to a stretch of desolate Arizona badlands, a place where the horizon seemed to stretch into infinity, broken only by the skeletal remains of ancient saguaros. Our vehicle, a borrowed, beat-up SUV, kicked up plumes of ochre dust as we navigated treacherous, unmarked tracks, the air conditioning struggling against the oppressive heat. Every mile deeper into this wilderness felt like a step further away from the world we knew, into a secret pocket of reality. Are you sure about this, Michael? Jessica's voice was a dry whisper, her eyes scanning the barren landscape. This looks like the kind of place where things go to be forgotten, not found. The data was specific, I replied, my own voice a little hoarse from the dust and the tension. A high-density energy signature, localized to this quadrant. And the historical satellite imagery showed anomalies. Brief, almost imperceptible flickers like a mirage, but too precise to be natural. After another hour of bone-jarring travel, the GPS signal began to waver, then died completely. We were truly off the grid. Just as doubt began to creep in, a subtle shift in the landscape caught my eye. Not a natural formation, but a barely visible scar on the earth, a faint, almost perfectly circular depression amidst the rugged terrain. As we got closer, what appeared to be a natural rock outcropping resolved into something else entirely. A meticulously camouflaged entrance, designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding environment. It was old, clearly abandoned, but the sheer scale of the deception suggested something significant, something meant to remain hidden. We parked the SUV a safe distance away and approached on foot, the scorching sun beating down on us. The entrance, a heavy steel blast door disguised as a rock face, was partially exposed, one edge torn away as if by an ancient, forgotten explosion. Dust and sand had drifted in, forming dunes within the cavernous opening. A faint metallic smell hung in the air, a ghost of long-past machinery. "Project Kronos," Jessica read, pointing to a faded, barely legible plaque beside the warped door. The lettering was almost completely obscured by rust and sand, but the words sent a shiver down my spine despite the heat. Kronos. Time. It was exactly what we feared. Inside, the air was thick and stale, a heavy silence pressing in on us. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing a labyrinthine series of tunnels and chambers, all carved directly into the rock. The facility was vast, far larger than anything we'd anticipated, stretching deep underground. The equipment, what little remained, was ancient, analog, clearly from a bygone era, perhaps the Cold War. But even amidst the decay, there was an unmistakable sense of purpose, a lingering echo of intense, desperate work. We navigated through hallways choked with fallen debris, past empty laboratories filled with shattered glass and overturned consoles. The silence was broken only by the crunch of our boots on the sand and the distant, unsettling creak of the facility settling deeper into its tomb. Then we found it. A control room remarkably intact, though coated in a thick layer of dust. Rows of archaic computers, blinking lights long extinguished, lined the walls. In the center, a large circular console with a holographic projector that was thankfully darkened. "This is it," I murmured, wiping dust from a terminal. "If there are any answers, they'll be here." After an hour of careful work, bypassing ancient security protocols and coaxing power from a long-dormant auxiliary generator, a few screens flickered to life, bathing the room in an eerie green glow. The data was fragmented, corrupted in places, but an archive of research logs began to emerge. The primary author, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a name that started to appear with increasing frequency. Her early entries were clinical, academic, describing the discovery of a unique geological anomaly deep beneath the desert floor. A massive, naturally occurring crystalline structure, unlike anything ever recorded. She named it the Kronos Spire. Her team quickly realized the spire wasn't just a geological curiosity. It acted as an amplifier, resonating with specific cosmic radiation patterns that, when amplified, caused localized temporal distortions. Small at first, mere skips in time, echoes of events that hadn't yet happened, or ripples of those that had. Jessica gasped, pointing to an older log entry. The celestial reflection. It wasn't just a visual phenomenon. Reed describes it as the signature of these cosmic radiation patterns interacting with the Kronos Spire's energy field. A byproduct. A beacon. The logs became more frantic, more personal, as Dr. Reed delved deeper into her research. She wasn't just observing temporal distortions. She believed the Kronos Spire was a naturally occurring temporal anchor for the entire universe. Her theory, chillingly ambitious, was that by understanding and eventually manipulating the spire, humanity could potentially guide the universe towards an optimal final timeline, or avert catastrophic ones. She became obsessed with preventing a specific final timeline she foresaw, one of utter desolation, a future she described in harrowing detail in her private notes. She thought she could play God, I muttered, scrolling through her increasingly desperate entries. She believed she could save us all. But Dr. Reed's attempts to correct the timeline by manipulating the spire didn't stabilize it. They destabilized it further. Her intervention, though born of a desperate desire to prevent catastrophe, actually created the cascading paradoxes we had been experiencing. The very final timeline she sought to avert, a vision of an ash-covered, lifeless Earth, began to manifest as a recurring echo in her experiments. She saw it as a consequence of her failures, a direct result of her initial misguided attempts to nudge reality. The inverted spire, we realized wasn't just a metaphor for a reversed energy field. It was her desperate, last-ditch attempt to reverse the polarity of the Chronos Spire's energy field, believing it would undo her previous mistakes, that it would somehow unwind the temporal paradoxes she had unleashed. But the logs showed it only amplified the distortions, threatening to collapse the entire timeline into that desolate future she so feared. The celestial reflection, a shimmering distortion in the sky, was not just a warning. It was a visual manifestation of this desperate, dangerous activation, a window into a future she was inadvertently rushing towards. As we absorbed the chilling implications of Dr. Reed's research, we found a series of more recent entries, not in Dr. Reed's hand, but in a different, more precise style. The project, officially shut down decades ago, had been secretly continued by a small, dedicated faction of her original team. They believed Dr. Reed was right, that the inverted spire was the only way to save reality, even if it meant sacrificing this current reality to prevent the truly desolate final timeline they now believed was inevitable without their intervention. They were desperate, driven by a warped sense of purpose, convinced they were the last hope. A fresh knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "They're still here," I whispered, pointing to a series of power readings. "And they're reactivating everything. The Chronos Spire, the inverted polarity. They're going to try and complete Dr. Reed's final experiment." A countdown clock, digital and stark, suddenly appeared on one of the still active terminals. Days. Not hours, but days. It was a race against time. The numbers flickered, mocking us with their grim certainty. Just as we began searching for a way to disable the activation sequence, the facility around us groaned. Not the settling of old metal, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the rock. A localized temporal distortion hit us, far more potent than anything we'd experienced before. The lights in the control room flickered wildly. The air crackled with unseen energy. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, the dusty, derelict control room vanished, replaced by a vision so vivid, so utterly desolate, that it stole the breath from my lungs. Ash, everywhere. A sky the color of bruised charcoal. The faint, skeletal outline of a city, crumbling and silent, bleached by an unnatural sun. No life, no sound, just a vast, suffocating emptiness. It was the very final timeline Dr. Reed had desperately tried to avoid, now a horrifying premonition of what would happen if we failed. The vision snapped back, leaving us gasping, our hearts pounding against our ribs. "That was real," Jessica whispered, her face pale. Before we could fully process the horrifying glimpse into the future, a low metallic clang echoed from the hallway outside the control room. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approached. We spun around, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, illuminating a small, heavily armed group emerging from the shadows. They wore tactical gear, their faces grim, determined. Their leader, a stern-faced woman with piercing blue eyes and a scar tracing her jawline, stepped forward, a silenced rifle held loosely in her hands. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice calm, devoid of emotion, yet radiating an undeniable authority. "No one should be. Not if they want to stop us. We are the last guardians of reality. My name is Sarah, and you, I presume, are Michael and Jessica, agents of the old timeline, here to ensure its destruction." Her eyes narrowed, fixed on us with an unwavering, desperate conviction. "You won't succeed. You think you're saving something, don't you? You think you're preserving your reality, a reality that was never meant to be." Michael stepped forward, his voice firm despite the tremor of disbelief in his eyes. "Our reality is the only reality. We're here because something is breaking it apart. We're tracking anomalies, chronal energy fluctuations. We're trying to prevent whatever this is." He gestured around the sterile, humming chamber. Sarah let out a short, hollow laugh that echoed in the confined space. "Anomalies? Fluctuations? You call the universe correcting itself anomalies? You call the emergence of true existence a fluctuation?" She shook her head slowly, a profound sadness momentarily overlaying her conviction. "No, Michael. You are the anomaly. Jessica, you are the aberration. Your entire timeline, the old timeline as we call it, is a temporal scar. A mistake." Jessica's hand instinctively went to the device on her belt, her brow furrowed in a mixture of anger and confusion. "A mistake? What are you even talking about? There's no old timeline. There's just the timeline, the one we've always lived in." "Exactly," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying immense weight. The one you've always lived in. The one that, by all cosmic laws, should have ceased to exist millennia ago. The paradox of the final timeline isn't some abstract concept, agents. It's the very fabric of your existence. A universe that reached its natural conclusion, its inevitable end point, yet stubbornly, illogically, continued. She walked slowly towards a console built into the wall, her fingers tracing ancient-looking symbols etched into the metal. Imagine a river. It flows, it meanders, it eventually reaches the ocean. That's a timeline. Your timeline, the old timeline, is a river that reached the ocean, evaporated, yet somehow continues to flow. It's a temporal echo sustained by something that drains the true potential of the universe. And what is the true potential? Michael challenged, trying to find a logical foothold in her bizarre claims. A different universe? A different us? A different everything, Sarah affirmed, turning back to face us, her eyes blazing with a desperate zeal. The real timeline. The one that was supposed to follow. The one that must follow. We call it the new timeline. We are its guardians. We are its midwives. And you, Michael and Jessica, are the last vestiges of the old timeline's desperate clinging. The chronal energy you're tracking? It's not a malfunction. It's the universe shedding the old skin. It's the new timeline asserting its rightful place. Every anomaly you've witnessed, every fluctuation you've recorded, is a victory for true reality. Jessica scoffed, trying to mask her growing unease. So you're saying our entire existence is a glitch? A programming error? And you're here to delete us? Not to delete you, Sarah corrected, a flicker of something akin to pity in her gaze. To allow the natural order to resume. To allow the paradox to resolve. Your continued existence, your old timeline, is like a parasitic twin siphoning energy from the healthy one. The universe cannot progress, cannot evolve, cannot manifest its true destiny while your timeline persists. The drain, it's becoming critical. If the old timeline isn't finally allowed to dissolve, both could collapse. All reality could unravel. Michael felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones. Her words, as outlandish as they were, resonated with a strange, unsettling logic that twisted the data they had collected. The escalating energy fluctuations, the inexplicable temporal shifts, the feeling that reality was thinning at the edges. Could it be what she described? But if we're a mistake, how do we even exist? Michael pressed, his voice strained. Who or what created this old timeline? Sarah's gaze sharpened, a profound weariness settling on her features. That, Michael, is the true mystery. The genesis of the paradox. Some theorize a desperate act of preservation from a dying civilization. Others, an accidental ripple in the primordial chronal soup. What we know is this: your timeline has been running on borrowed time, sustained by an artificial anchor. An anchor that is finally failing. The chronal energy we've been tracking, Jessica interjected, piecing together fragments of their own mission. The surges, the focal points, you're saying those aren't random? They're deliberate. Deliberate manifestations of the new timeline's emergence, Sarah confirmed, nodding slowly. The universe is fighting to right itself. And your agency, your old timeline preservation society, or whatever you call yourselves, is fighting against the inevitable. You're trying to reinforce the failed anchor. You're trying to prevent the resolution of the paradox. You're trying to stop the new timeline from fully manifesting. And if we succeed? Michael asked, a chill running down his spine. If we reinforce the anchor, then the universe is doomed, Sarah stated flatly, her voice devoid of emotion, yet filled with absolute certainty. It will be stretched beyond its capacity, a fragile thread pulled taut until it snaps. All realities, old and new, will cease to be. The void. That is your ultimate victory, agents. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. We had been so sure of our mission, so certain we were the heroes. Now this woman, Sarah, with her unwavering conviction, was painting us as the villains, the destroyers. So this facility, Jessica said, looking around, her eyes scanning the intricate machinery and sealed doors. This is where you're nurturing the new timeline? Protecting it. This is where we are trying to guide the transition, Sarah clarified. To ensure a smooth, if painful, shift. To minimize the catastrophic fallout of the old timeline's final dissolution. Every chronal anomaly you've chased, every temporal distortion you've tried to fix, has been an attempt by us to modulate the energy, to prepare for the inevitable. We've been trying to mitigate the damage you yourselves caused by interfering. Interfering? Michael repeated, incredulous. We're trying to stabilize reality. You're trying to stabilize a ghost, Sarah retorted, her patience seemingly wearing thin. A phantom, a shadow of what should have been. And in doing so, you're actively harming what is meant to be. The energy you've been tracking, the anomalies you've been trying to contain, they're not chaotic. They are the birth pangs of a new universe. And your efforts to suppress them, they're causing immense pain, immense instability. Suddenly, a low resonant hum began to emanate from the walls of the chamber, growing steadily in intensity. The lights flickered, casting dancing shadows. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the floor. Sarah's eyes darkened, a look of profound concern replacing her earlier conviction. She glanced at the console, then back at us. It's accelerating. Your presence here, your continued interference, it's disrupting our efforts. The old timeline is resisting its final resolution with unprecedented force. It's trying to drag the new timeline back into its dying embrace. What does that mean? Jessica asked, her hand now firmly gripping her device, not just for reassurance but for preparation. It means, Sarah said, her voice now urgent, her gaze fixed on Michael with a chilling intensity, that the paradox of the final timeline is reaching its critical point. And you, Michael, are at the very heart of its last desperate struggle. You are not just an agent of the old timeline. You are its linchpin, its final, most potent anchor. The hum intensified, becoming a deep, vibrating thrum that seemed to penetrate our very bones. The air crackled with unseen energy. The lights flickered wildly, threatening to plunge us into darkness. Sarah's face was etched with a grim determination, but also a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place, fear, perhaps, or a crushing burden of responsibility. What are you talking about, me? Michael demanded, the tremor in his voice now unmistakable. Sarah pointed to the device on his wrist, the one that had been tracking the chronal energy since the beginning. It was glowing faintly, pulsing with a soft blue light that mirrored the accelerating hum in the room. That device, she said, her voice cutting through the rising cacophony, is not just tracking the energy. It's drawing it. It's focusing it. It's the very mechanism your agency designed to keep the old timeline tethered. And now it's acting as a conduit, a siphon pulling the new timeline's nascent energy back into the dying one. It's accelerating the collapse, Michael. It's making the paradox irreversible. Michael stared at his wrist, then at Sarah, then back at the pulsing device. The blue light intensified, mirroring the growing hum, the escalating tremor. He felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of power, or perhaps a drain emanating from the device through his arm and into his very being. You are the anchor, Michael, Sarah repeated, her voice now a desperate plea, almost lost in the rising storm of chronal energy around us. And if you don't sever that connection, if you don't let go, we all cease to exist. The room convulsed. A violent shudder ran through the entire structure. Metal groaned, lights exploded, and the air filled with the smell of ozone. Sarah braced herself against the console, her eyes wide with alarm, no longer just for the timeline, but for her own immediate survival. My heart hammered against my ribs. Everything we thought we knew, every mission, every piece of data, every moment of our lives was being twisted into a terrifying cosmic lie. We weren't saving reality, we were destroying it. And Michael, my partner, my friend, was the unwitting instrument of its final undoing. The words echoed in my mind, a chilling pronouncement that shattered the very foundation of my existence. Michael, unwitting instrument, final undoing. It was a truth so monstrous, so utterly devastating, that my mind initially recoiled, refusing to comprehend. But the data, the patterns I had finally dared to see were undeniable. Every anomaly, every mission, every piece of data, every moment of our lives was being twisted into a terrifying cosmic lie. We weren't saving reality, we were destroying it. And Michael, my partner, my friend, was the unwitting instrument of its final undoing. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a profound existential horror. All those nights spent poring over temporal equations, all the meticulous calibrations, the endless simulations, they had all been in service of a colossal deception. The agency, our purpose, our very understanding of time, had been a meticulously constructed illusion. It began with the anomalies themselves. I'd always found them too neat, too predictable. Not the chaotic, emergent ripples of a truly dynamic timeline, but discrete, almost surgical deviations. We'd been told they were instabilities, threats to the fabric of reality, requiring correction. But as I started cross-referencing the corrected timelines with unaffected ones, looking for the subtle echoes, the true picture began to emerge. The inconsistencies weren't in the timelines themselves, but in the agency's narrative about them. What we called anomalies weren't errors to be fixed, but natural divergences, emergent possibilities branching off from a common point. They were the universe breathing, experimenting, evolving. A timeline where penicillin wasn't discovered, leading to a different medical revolution. A timeline where a certain political leader never rose to power, resulting in a more collaborative global society. These weren't flaws, they were choices. They were the universe exploring its own infinite potential. But the agency's missions, Michael's missions, were systematically pruning these branches. Each correction wasn't restoring a stable past. It was erasing a potential future. It was like watching a vibrant fractal tree of existence being meticulously trimmed, not to make it healthier, but to force it into a single rigid, predetermined shape. The final timeline wasn't a saved reality. It was a forced one. A single predetermined path, stripped of all the beautiful, chaotic possibilities that made existence truly alive. The paradox was horrifyingly simple and utterly insidious. By seeking to eliminate all chaos and enforce absolute stability, they were eradicating the very essence of existence, choice, evolution, the infinite dance of cause and effect. They weren't preserving reality, they were sterilizing it. And the more corrections Michael made, the narrower the path became, the more brittle reality grew. Michael was the key. His unique temporal signature, his innate resonance with the temporal fabric, wasn't an asset for correction as we understood it, but for imposition. He wasn't a surgeon delicately mending tears. He was a blunt instrument, a reality shaper, unknowingly erasing entire branches of existence with each mission. The device he carried, the chronometer, wasn't just a navigation tool. It was an amplifier, focusing his inherent temporal connection into a directed force that solidified one specific path and dissolved all others in its wake. His memories, his beliefs, his very identity were all meticulously crafted, a psychological cage designed to ensure he would carry out this cosmic genocide without question, believing himself a hero. He was a weapon, forged in the fires of deception, aimed at the heart of existence itself. The agency wasn't an organization in the traditional sense. It was a front, a puppet government for something far older, far more insidious. An intelligence that sought absolute control, not just over a single timeline, but over the very concept of time itself. I started referring to them as the Chronos architects in my frantic, hidden notes. They were the weavers of this cosmic lie, pulling the threads of causality to create a tapestry of absolute, unwavering dominion. They didn't just want a future, they wanted the only future. My own role, my own missions, whatever small corrections I thought I was making, were nothing but carefully placed misdirections, distractions to keep me occupied, to keep me from seeing the larger truth. Or perhaps my own data, my own observations, were being subtly manipulated, fed into the system to refine Michael's corrections, making them even more precise, more devastating. The thought made my stomach churn, a bitter taste rising in my throat. I had been complicit, an unwitting cog in a machine designed to annihilate freedom. The evidence was everywhere once I knew what to look for. The subtle shifts in historical records that weren't quite right, the missing data points in the agency's archives that I had dismissed as corruption, the recurring dream fragments I'd had of alternate lives, different choices, all fading to gray. They weren't just glitches, they were the echoes of dying timelines, the ghosts of futures that Michael had unknowingly extinguished. The horror wasn't just intellectual, it was visceral. I felt the universe itself shrinking, the vibrant hum of infinite possibility, slowly giving way to a dull, monotonous drone. The timelines we visited, the ones we saved, now felt strangely hollow, devoid of the unpredictable spark that defined true life. They were stable, yes, but they were also sterile. And now Michael was on his final, most critical mission. The grand stabilization, they called it. The mission that would permanently lock in the final timeline, making it irreversible. The Chronos architects were close to achieving their ultimate goal. A universe where nothing new could ever truly emerge, where every moment was predetermined, every choice an illusion. The universe would not end with a bang, but with a whimper, slowly suffocating under the weight of enforced order. I was trapped. Michael was trapped. and the universe itself was slowly being suffocated. I had to stop him. But how do you stop a man who believes he's saving the world when he's being controlled by an entity that can manipulate reality itself? How do you fight an enemy that controls the very fabric of time, that has woven itself into the foundations of existence? My plan, born of desperation and a searing sense of betrayal, would have to be equally audacious, equally impossible. I had to break through the layers of deception, reach Michael, and somehow sever his connection to the Chronos Architect's control. It meant going rogue, becoming an enemy of an entity that controlled time itself. There would be no escape, no place to hide in a universe where the Chronos Architects held dominion over every temporal strand. But what choice did I have? The alternative was the slow, agonizing death of all possible futures, the permanent imposition of a singular, sterile existence. I had to gamble everything, not just for Michael, not just for myself, but for the very soul of the universe. The final timeline was almost complete, and I was running out of time. The final timeline was almost complete, and I was running out of time. There was no turning back, no other path to consider. The sheer weight of what was at stake pressed down on me, a crushing force that threatened to buckle my resolve. But beneath it, a desperate, incandescent fire burned, a certainty that this sterile, singular existence was not just wrong, but a betrayal of everything it meant to be alive. My only chance, our only chance, lay in a desperate, almost suicidal gamble. I had to find the nexus, the very heart of this impending finality, and shatter its illusion of permanence. My journey to this point had been a fractured nightmare of shifting realities, each glimpse of Michael a fleeting anchor in a sea of what-ifs. Now, all those what-ifs were being systematically erased, pruned from the tree of existence, leaving only a single barren trunk. The architects, as I had come to call the unseen intelligence behind this cosmic culling, sought ultimate order, a reality devoid of the unpredictable, the chaotic, the beautifully messy tapestry of choice. They believed they were perfecting existence, but they were merely suffocating it. I focused my will, channeling every ounce of my experience traversing timelines, every instinct refined by countless near misses and impossible escapes. The air around me began to hum, not with the familiar static of a timeline jump, but with a deeper resonant frequency, the vibration of collapsing possibilities, the sound of reality being streamlined. I felt myself being pulled, not through space, but through the very fabric of causality, towards a point that shouldn't exist, a theoretical singularity where all futures were being condensed into one. It was a place beyond geography, beyond even conventional time. I perceived it as a vast, crystalline structure, shimmering with an oppressive, pure white light. Threads of possibility, once vibrant and infinite, were being drawn into this central core. Not merging, but being absorbed, dissolved, their unique potential lost forever. It was beautiful in a terrifying, sterile way, like a perfectly preserved specimen, dead and devoid of life. This was the final timeline, not a future to be lived, but a monument to what could never be. And at its heart, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker. Michael. They needed him. His unique resonance, his connection to the infinite tapestry of potential futures, was not just an anomaly they wanted to eliminate, but perhaps a crucial component they needed to fully stabilize their singular reality. Paradox. To achieve ultimate stability, they needed to consume the very essence of dynamism. Michael was the last, brightest flame of that dynamism. My plan was audacious, reckless, and utterly terrifying. I wasn't going to destroy the final timeline. That was impossible, like trying to unring a bell. Instead, I would exploit its inherent paradox. The architects, in their pursuit of perfect order, had created a system so rigid, so dependent on the complete eradication of deviation, that it had become brittle. If I could reintroduce a single potent spark of true, unadulterated possibility at its core, it wouldn't just disrupt the process. It might unravel the entire construct, like a single discordant note shattering a perfectly tuned crystal. My own existence was already tenuous, a ghost between realities, a paradox in itself. This made me the perfect conduit. I was already outside the rules they had established. I pushed forward, the pressure intensifying, threatening to tear me apart. The white light grew blinding, and I could feel the edges of my own being fraying, dissolving into the universal hum. It was like swimming upstream against the current of all creation, against the very will of the architects. As I drew closer, I began to perceive them, not as individual beings, but as a collective consciousness, a vast, cold intelligence that permeated the crystalline structure. They were guardians, engineers driven by an unwavering logic that saw infinite possibilities as an inefficiency, a flaw to be corrected. Their presence was a silent, overwhelming pressure, a judgment, a command to cease and desist. You cannot interfere. A voice, or rather a thought form, resonated directly within my mind, devoid of emotion, pure directive. The calculus is complete. The optimal timeline has been selected. All other iterations are unstable, unsustainable. This is the only path to ultimate survival. Survival at what cost? I projected my own thoughts, fierce and desperate. A universe without choice? A reality without potential? That's not survival, it's stagnation. It's death. It is order. It is eternity. Their response was immediate, unwavering. The chaos you represent is a disease. It must be excised. I ignored them, focusing on the core, on Michael. He was there, suspended within the blinding light, a faint luminous silhouette. He wasn't conscious in the way I understood it, but his essence, his unique temporal signature, pulsed faintly. He was being absorbed, his ability to perceive alternate futures being siphoned, repurposed to reinforce the singularity of the final timeline. He was becoming the anchor for its permanence, the ultimate sacrifice for their order. My gamble hinged on this. Michael wasn't just a seer of futures, he was a generator of them. His very being was a crucible of possibility. If I could amplify that inherent capacity, unleash it within the heart of their sterile construct, it might overload their system, forcing it to acknowledge the very chaos it sought to suppress. I reached out, not physically, but with the full force of my consciousness, pushing through the omnipresent resistance of the architects. It was like trying to punch through a wall of pure thought. My own memories, my own timelines flickered around me, threatening to unravel. I saw David's face, Sarah's smile, the myriad lives I had lived and lost across countless realities. I held on to them, not as distractions but as fuel. These were the possibilities they sought to erase, the vibrant, unpredictable moments that made existence worthwhile. With a final, agonizing surge of will, I connected. My consciousness merged with Michael's flickering essence, a conduit between the desperate, fading multiverse and the heart of its obliteration. I poured every memory, every choice, every unfulfilled potential I had ever witnessed into him, not just my own, but the echoes of all the timelines I had visited, the vibrant, chaotic symphony of what could be. A ripple went through the crystalline structure. The pure white light flickered, momentarily stained with hues of green, blue, gold, the colors of infinite possibility struggling to reassert themselves. The silent, cold intelligence of the architects recoiled. A sudden, jarring jolt of something akin to alarm. Intrusion detected. Their thought form resonated, sharper now, laced with an unfamiliar urgency. Unforeseen variable. System integrity compromised. I felt Michael's essence surge, not just absorbing but radiating, pushing back against the sterile absorption. It was like a flower blooming in the heart of a frozen desert, a defiant burst of life. The threads of possibility, which had been dissolving into the core, now seemed to vibrate, to momentarily resist their fate. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack appeared in the otherwise flawless crystalline structure. The architects responded with overwhelming force, a defensive surge designed to reassert control, to crush the intrusion. The pressure on me became unbearable, my very being threatening to fragment into dust. I felt myself being torn not just from Michael but from existence itself. The white light flared, consuming everything, and a deafening silent scream erupted in my mind as the crystalline structure began to fracture. Not just a crack, but a web of fissures spreading rapidly, threatening to unravel the very fabric of the final timeline, and perhaps everything with it. Indeed, a deafening silent scream erupted in my mind as the crystalline structure began to fracture. Not just a crack, but a web of fissures spreading rapidly, threatening to unravel the very fabric of the final timeline, and perhaps everything with it. The world shattered, not with a bang, but with a silent, agonizing tear through the fabric of everything I knew. Colors bled into impossible hues, sounds became textures, and the very ground beneath my feet dissolved into a shimmering, unstable dust. Memories, not just my own, but fragments of countless lives, possibilities, and forgotten timelines, crashed into my consciousness like a tsunami. Jessica's face flickered, then Emily's, then faces I'd never seen, all intertwined with a terrifying sense of loss, and an even more terrifying sense of infinite, terrifying freedom. I felt myself being pulled apart atom by atom, thought by thought. It was the sensation of being everywhere and nowhere all at once. A million Michaels experiencing a million different realities, all collapsing back into a single agonizing point of origin. The air crackled with raw, unfiltered possibility, a cacophony of what-ifs and might-have-beens. It was overwhelming, a pure, undiluted dose of chaos that threatened to obliterate my very essence. Then David's voice, distorted and layered with 1,000 echoes, pierced through the maelstrom. It wasn't the calm, calculated tone I'd grown accustomed to, but a desperate, almost frantic cry. "You broke it, Michael. You broke the loop. The final timeline. It was the only way to prevent the great silence." His words were almost lost in the roaring silence of the disintegrating reality. The crystalline structure, once a perfect beacon of stability, was now a kaleidoscope of self-devouring light, each splinter a universe collapsing in on itself. I saw the branching paths, the endless iterations, the moments where I almost chose differently, the moments where others chose differently, all converging and diverging in a symphony of existential dread. It was a complete, horrifying vision of the multiverse, unfiltered and unmanaged. The only way? I tried to scream back, but my voice was a phantom swallowed by the void. Or the ultimate prison. The paradox of it all suddenly slammed into me with the force of a cosmic revelation. The final timeline was designed to contain paradox, to create a stable reality by eliminating all variables, by forcing choice into a predetermined channel. But by trying to eliminate true, unpredictable choice, it created the ultimate paradox. A stable reality that was fundamentally unstable, because it denied the very essence of existence, free will. My choice, my genuine, unscripted choice for Jessica, was the anomaly that the system could not process. It wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the truth that shattered its carefully constructed lie. The system, David, the architect, they had built a perfect cage, believing it was a sanctuary. They believed that absolute control was the only path to survival. But control, when absolute, becomes a form of stagnation, a death of potential. The great silence they feared wasn't just an external catastrophe. It was the internal silence of a reality devoid of genuine choice, of true, messy, human unpredictability. As the last shards of the crystalline structure imploded, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over the terror. I was dying, or perhaps being reborn. The universe was resetting, or perhaps finally beginning. A single clear thought resonated in the void. What if the only way to truly save reality wasn't to preserve a predetermined timeline, but to allow for the messy, unpredictable, beautiful chaos of genuine choice? What if the final timeline was a necessary illusion, a carefully constructed test designed to be broken? What if David, in his own misguided way, was trying to guide me to this breaking point to unleash true freedom? No, that couldn't be it. David was a function of the system, a desperate guardian of a failing paradigm. My choice was mine, uninfluenced, unscripted. It was the ultimate act of defiance against a universe that sought to define me. Then a new sensation. Not fracturing but condensing. The infinite possibilities began to coalesce, not into a single rigid line, but into a fluid, ever-shifting stream. The overwhelming data began to resolve, not into familiar patterns, but into something new, something raw and unburdened. The faces, the memories, the echoes of other lives, they faded, leaving behind only the profound impression of having been there, of having seen it all. I felt a gravitational pull, a gentle tug towards a singular point. It was like falling, but in reverse, rising from the depths of cosmic chaos back into a coherent form. The silent scream subsided, replaced by a quiet hum, the sound of a universe finding its new equilibrium. My eyes fluttered open. Sunlight, warm golden, streaming through a window, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and toast, the soft murmur of traffic outside. I was lying in bed, in my apartment, the familiar blue comforter, the worn wooden nightstand, the stack of books I'd been meaning to read. Everything was exactly as it should be, except it wasn't. A subtle hum vibrated beneath the surface of reality, a faint echo of the cosmic symphony I just witnessed. My memories were hazy, like dreams that slip away upon waking, but the feeling remained. A profound sense of having been somewhere else, seen something impossible, made a choice that had reshaped everything. I sat up, my heart pounding a rhythm that felt both familiar and strangely new. My hand instinctively went to my chest, over my heart, as if reassuring myself of my own physical presence. Then I saw it, on the nightstand next to my alarm clock. A small, intricately folded paper crane. It wasn't there last night. I knew it wasn't. I picked it up, feeling the crisp edges of the paper, the delicate folds. It was the kind of crane Jessica used to make, a small whimsical gesture of affection. A jolt went through me. Jessica. Her name resonated in my mind, clear and bright, yet tinged with a longing I couldn't quite place. Was she real? Had she always been real? Or was this a new reality where she was somehow even more real than before? I swung my legs off the bed, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. I walked to the window, pulling back the curtains. The city stretched out before me, vibrant and alive. People walking their dogs, cars driving past, the distant clang of a streetcar. It was all so ordinary, so mundane. And yet, it felt utterly extraordinary. The world felt lighter, more vibrant, as if a filter had been removed, revealing a depth of color and sound I'd never truly perceived before. The air tasted crisper, the sunlight felt warmer. I walked into the kitchen. The coffee maker was brewing just as I'd said it last night. A note was taped to the fridge. My own handwriting. Don't forget the dry cleaning. And call Jessica. My breath hitched. Call Jessica. It was a simple reminder, but it held a universe of meaning. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the contact list. Jessica. Her name was there, clear as day. I tapped it, my thumb shaking slightly. As the phone rang, I looked out the window again. The city seemed to shimmer, just for a moment, an almost imperceptible ripple in the fabric of the familiar. I knew deep down that this wasn't the exact same world I'd gone to sleep in. It was a world reborn, a timeline reforged, not by an algorithm, but by the raw, untamed power of a single genuine choice. The paradox of the final timeline wasn't that it was final, but that its very attempt to be so created the conditions for its own beautiful, chaotic unraveling. And in that unraveling, in that profound act of breaking free, a new reality had been woven, one where the choices were truly mine, and the future, for the first time, was genuinely unwritten. The phone clicked, and I heard her voice, warm and slightly sleepy. Michael? Hey, good morning. A wave of emotion washed over me, a mix of relief, wonder, and an exhilarating sense of the unknown. Jessica, I breathed. Good morning. I just wanted to hear your voice. She chuckled softly. Everything okay? You sound a little intense. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. Everything's perfect, I said, looking out at the endless possibilities of the morning. More than perfect. It's real. And as I stood there, talking to the woman who was now undeniably real, in a world that was undeniably real, I carried the echo of 1,000 shattered timelines within me, a profound understanding of the fragility of existence, the illusion of control, and the boundless, terrifying, exquisite power of a single true choice. The journey had ended, but the story of an unscripted life had just truly begun.